This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Broadcasting from the state-of-the-art L-shaped studios at beautiful and serene Ho-Ho Loon Plaza in Vancouver, British Columbia. Greg Phillips and Nick Duke are the Hard-Traveling Fanboys.
Hard-Traveling Fanboys. Hard-Traveling Fanboys. Hard-Traveling Fanboys. Hard-Traveling Fanboys. Hard-Traveling Fanboys. Hard-Traveling Fanboys. Hard-Traveling Fanboys.
Black Panther Month.
Mr. Tarkanian! I've been lifting weights and doing cocaine for hours! I am ready for you!
Oh, Scott Jorgensen, I love it. I am literally going to murder you.
Welcome, everyone, to the L-shaped studio in beautiful Ho-Ho Loon Plaza in the wondrous township of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We are the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. I am Nick Duke. He is Greg Phillips. No, wait, I got that wrong. Wait a minute. I am Greg Phillips, and he is Nick Duke. Is that right?
Something like that.
Something like that. Who can tell the ass from the head and the anus from the sphincter at this point? But nevertheless, we are the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, and we are bringing to you Black Panther Month here at Place to Be Nation Pop, the only place to be in your pop culture world. And one of the reasons it's the only place to be in your pop culture world is because we are willing to go where others dare not tread. We are willing to take that perilous journey through the beyond that our listeners shouldn't have to go through. And sometimes we like to pass that pain on to the listeners, granted, in the form of our podcast. But in this case, we are doing just that because in celebrating Black Panther Month, last week we took a look at a great Christopher Priest story called The Client that introduced a lot of concepts of Black Panther to us. Next week, we'll be taking a look at Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther run, which should be good in its own right. But you have to take the good. You have to take the bad, Nick.
You take them both. And there you have
the facts of life.
And they're all about you, coincidentally enough.
Indeed. And in this case, the facts of life are that we are here to present to you an episode of Off the Page, which is where we take a look at a piece of comic book media that is not a comic book itself. Sometimes it could be a movie, a TV show, a game. It could be anything, really. But in this case, it's a TV series. And
in a manner of speaking, anyway.
In a manner of speaking. It is the, shout out to Sam Neely, it is the short-lived Black Panther animated series produced by Marvel Entertainment as well as BET. And it aired originally in 2010, from January 16 to January 30 of 2010. So, as you can tell, it didn't catch on. Didn't quite catch on the way that they were hoping.
That's not actually entirely accurate, Greg. Strangely enough, it actually aired on Australia's version of ABC in January of 2010 before making its U.S. air date in November of 2011. This was announced way back in 2008, and after doing a little research, it seems like that pretty much from the announcement on, this thing was in something of a development hell. I think all parties involved knew that it had major issues, and as a result, it only wound up running for 3 weeks and wound up being pulled from the schedule, has never been seen on television since then, and has become something of a difficult thing to find if you're so inclined to do so. The DVDs are out there, the iTunes episodes are out there, but Marvel is not overly thrilled about promoting this thing's existence at this point.
Nor should they be, but we're getting into the weeds a little bit. Nevertheless, what do we do here at the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, Nick? We soldier on. If we're told we can't get a hold of a copy of something, by God, we will find a copy of that. A legal,
yes,
non-controversial copy of the show. And we found that, much as we did for the Adrian Palicki Wonder Woman pilot.
Yes.
We indeed got our hands through sources close to the situation of a few episodes of, in your case, all the episodes of the Black Panther animated series by BET. Now, this is it was actually produced by Marvel Knights Animation. Let's take a look at Marvel Knights Animation and see what else they've done. Their other work includes hybrid comic animation series, sort of like motion comics with a little bit more motion than the typical motion comic. And so you've got Spider-Woman, Agent of S.W.O.R.D., never seen it. Astonishing X-Men, Gifted, which we reviewed, I believe.
We did.
For one of our
columns back in
the day. Iron Man Extremis, which I've never seen. And Thor, Loki, Blood Brothers, which sounds like it would be right up your alley. Although if it's like this, probably not. So Marvel Knights Animation, Hudlin Entertainment, which is the production branch of Reginald Hudlin, who I believe at the time was the president of BET. Is that correct?
I believe that was the case as well. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Reginald Hudlin was at the time president of entertainment at BET. And interestingly enough, he had also written the comic work that this was based off of. He wrote many of the issues of the Black Panther from 2005 to 2008. Most notably, he oversaw the storyline that saw Black Panther and Storm marry one another back in 2006. So he actually had a decent little run for Marvel on the character. And being that he was president of entertainment at BET at the time, this was considered something of a get for Marvel, despite his relative lack of comic experience. Indeed.
And so the story that you're referring to that it's adapting here, roughly adapting, is, or actually pretty accurately adapting as it turns out, is Who is the Black Panther?
My lord, Greg, do you know what else Reginald Hudlin was involved with in the realm of animation?
I don't know. Tell me.
He directed a little animated film back in 1992 that you may have heard of, Greg, featuring a young woman by the name of Bebe and her children.
Bebe's kids! Yes! Yes! I want you to remember there are two truisms in this world, Nick, and one of them is that it ain't you, it ain't me, it's Bebe's kids.
It's Bebe's kids. Yes.
Would you like to know the truism?
Yes, please.
There is only one true Reginald in this world, and his name ain't Hudlin, baby.
It's Val Johnson. My lord, I did not know that this guy was so prolific. Check this out. Check this list of directorial credits out, Greg. House Party, Boomerang, Bebe's Kids, The Great White Hype, The Ladies' Man.
Ooh.
Yes.
It's the lady.
Marshall, that Thurgood Marshall movie that just came out.
I just saw today that there was a football player who was recruited named Courvoisier.
Oh.
Courvoisier Smoke, in fact.
Courvoisier Cognac, right here.
Nevertheless, Reginald Hudlin has a great deal of cash, cultural cash behind him, a history of directing good films and whatnot. But this was a project that, and let's be fair to Reginald Hudlin, this is a very different format than I think anyone was prepared for at the time. Now, motion comics themselves, this was not, one of the first motion comics. Motion comics have been being done for probably 2 or 3 years before this. The Watchmen one came out like a year before. There was a Dark Knight one apparently that I've never seen that came out around the time of that movie. So they existed before that, but it was a format that was not. I mean, we've talked in the past about that Watchmen motion comic, and while it is a faithful adaptation of the source material, there were aspects of it that didn't work very well, such as the voice acting at times.
Yes, because the Watchmen motion comic, unlike most other motion comics, went the audiobook route. And what I mean by that is it was one guy reading the story, even for all the characters, male, female, or otherwise, were all voiced by the same guy, and it was very strange.
Adopting an Ed Asner-like voice for the female characters was a bold choice, Cotton.
And it did not pay off, in case you were wondering.
Pay off, but it was still a good motion comic. They did really well with the format. But what we're here to talk about is this motion comic, and it's kind of a different format. You're basically directly adapting a comic book story and adding, in this case, what makes this a little bit different is it's taking away the panel format entirely and making it kind of like a cartoon in a way. And let's just go straight out from the get-go. It doesn't really work.
No, it doesn't.
At any point. And I think that's probably unfortunate to the source material, but we're going to get into this and delve into the various aspects of it. But I'll start with what I saw and what Nick saw. Nick watched all 6 episodes, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I watched the first 2 episodes of this one, and I feel like I watched enough to make a value judgment of it.
Now
a combined 40 minutes of.
Now I don't think you saw any Juggernaut in those 40 minutes.
I did.
Oh,
Juggernaut showed up in the second episode.
That's right. Okay.
Yep. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into everything on here. I've never read the comic book series, Who is Black Panther? I've not encountered it.
Nor have I to this point. But based on my research, from what I could gather, this series is a direct adaptation of that Who is the Black Panther story arc, with the only exception being in the comic book, the Rhino played one of the villains on the villainous team that was led by Ulysses Claw. Here in the animated series, the Rhino is replaced by the Juggernaut. So, with the exception of that character swap, I don't think there were any other changes.
The big Rhino. We'll do him a solid.
We might be hearing some more of Stu Hart on these very airwaves not too long from now, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Well, does it not? And I think that probably. I don't know what the details are behind this story, but you said he wrote a long run on Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if this was originally supposed to be just a one-off, because doesn't this feel like somebody who is given a Marvel comic story and just wants to play with as many pieces as he can in a short time frame?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent it kind of does, but, he wound up staying on for a little while. It was notable because they kind of let him retell T'Challa's origin, give him a new updated origin, because this is very much an origin story for T'Challa in terms of his path to becoming the Black Panther and his early days as the ruler of Wakanda. So no real continuity tie to the Chris Priest graphic novel that we just reviewed last week. This seems to be 2 totally different incarnations, 2 totally different takes.
Exactly, and yeah,
now, it's not for us to say which one is better.
No, it is for us to say. Right, it is for us to say, Nick, and the Priest one is better.
It's better.
It's our show, you see.
Right.
So, yeah, it feels at times like a kid being told, not a kid. I'm not trying to patronize the guy, but it feels like someone being told, "Hey, you get 6 issues to write the Black Panther," and him saying, "Wow." Going back to his childhood, saying, I'm getting to write Marvel comics. I'm going to fit all the Marvel characters I want in here, even if it doesn't really serve the story. So we get ultimately pointless cameos by, just in the first 2 episodes, we get cameos by Captain America, Storm, Cyclops, Wolverine, the Juggernaut, Deathlock. Oh gosh, and then I don't even know who the hell that the guy that takes the prostitute and takes over her body.
Yeah, I don't know who that is either.
To be?
And she plays and then she goes on to play a role throughout the rest of the series in like this subplot that never goes anywhere. So I don't know if they were like setting up for, in the comic a future story arc, and in the animated series a future season, but it never goes anywhere, and it's an ultra bizarre subplot. I completely missed Deathlock. You were clearly paying more
that was
attention.
Deathlock was that zombie character we were talking about off the air that we couldn't figure out the name of, that they were kept bringing back to life. The only reason I picked that up is there's a line of dialogue in the second episode where they go, "The Deathlocks appear to be ready."
So maybe they were like, Deathlocks as opposed to the Deathlock. I don't know.
Are there multiple Deathlock? Is Deathlock like Death's Head? Are there like 45 of them?
I don't know. I don't know. I know near the end there are a bunch of those zombie cyborg soldier things in the climax. So
yes, it's an army of Deathlocks. Yeah, but we all know that Death's Head 44 could have ended it if he had shown up on time, but Death's Heads 1 through 42 didn't carry their end of the bargain.
What about Death's Head? What about Death's Head 43 though? You just said 44 up against 1 through 42.
43 actually is one of the Deathlocks, so it's kind of a they just plumb forgot him and he became a Deathlock. So anyway, the Deathlock, yeah, there's just so many cameos from characters that really don't fit. And just looking over this, apparently that other character was the Black Knight. The Black Knight.
What other character?
The takeover of the prostitute guy.
No, he was not.
No? Who was the Black Knight?
The Black Knight pops up later in the show when you didn't get to that point, but Ulysses Claw puts together a team of supervillains to invade Wakanda, made up of the Juggernaut, the Russian Radioactive Man, the new villainous Black Knight, and Batroc the Leaper with a very French accent.
Yes, Batroc the Leaper. I did encounter Batroc the Leaper, yeah. All of this just doesn't seem like it fits at all for the narrative that they're trying to tell of introducing you to these characters. Remember, this is a world where 90% of the people in America have never encountered the character of the Black Panther before.
Right.
So you're watching this on TV in 2010, and let's say that you're just flipping the channels and you're like, hey, Black Panther's coming on. Let's see what this is all about. You're not going to have any idea who this character is. And honestly, through 2 episodes, the show doesn't do a whole lot to make you love the character of the Black Panther. The concept, maybe.
Right.
But you don't really get to know T'Challa very well.
Yeah, because that first episode is almost entirely dealing with like the mythology of the Black Panther, like the lineage, rather than T'Challa himself. So you get to see like a 1940s Black Panther, and you get to see like his uncles, seemingly based on the story this show tells. I'm guessing his uncle was Black Panther for all of like 3 days before T'Challa overthrew him.
Yes.
You get to see a lot of different things, a lot of different Black Panthers, but you don't really spend, at least in the first 2 episodes anyway, very much time with T'Challa himself. And I think that's to the show's detriment. When you've only got 6 episodes to tell your story, you don't have enough time to really become endeared to T'Challa the way you should for a new watcher or a new reader, especially because you have all these other concurrent subplots going on that, and a lot of which don't really add anything to the main narrative.
And they jump around.
Right.
They jump around back and forth, as you see in comics a lot, but it just doesn't work on the screen. And what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about these first 2 episodes, and then I'll let Nick kind of fill you guys in on anything that stood out in the following 4 episodes, positively or negatively. But basically, from the very get-go, we talked about the animation, and that's kind of the thing I wanted to start with because it's the most glaring. It's very hard to describe, is it not, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're not familiar with the concept of a motion comic, the idea is that they basically take the same art that is used in the books and give it just enough animation to give you the illusion of movement. So, like, for example, if the Black Panther is walking across the screen, his legs will barely move and his arms will swing back and forth while the rest of him stays static, not really moving in any kind of natural way that you would see in typical, traditional animation. It's a unique, way to go about adapting these things. And, as Greg said earlier, motion comics have come a long way, but it's still ultimately, I think, going to be one of those things that you either like or you don't like, and you're probably not going to be swayed on it, because at a certain point, there's only so much that a motion comic can become refined before it just becomes standard animation, you know?
Right, exactly. And that's a great point. We talked in the Astonishing X-Men one about how certain things worked well, certain things didn't. In this case, it just never really appears to get a hold of what it wants to be. There are times watching this where it moves a little bit more like a traditional cartoon, but for the most part, it's like a motion comic. It's very stilted, and I think that going back and forth hurts it a lot, because there are some times where there's a fight scene in episode 2 where somebody is throwing a bunch of punches and it actually looks kind of smoothly animated, and then it cuts to somebody walking and it's just their picture moving up and down on the screen with their eyes occasionally shifting around a little bit.
Right.
And it's just jarring.
Yeah. I don't think, I mean, the motion techniques aside, I don't think they were helped very much by the art style. And I say that as someone who is generally higher on John Romita Jr.'s art than you are. But this book originally was drawn by John Romita Jr., and so they obviously keep his art style here. And as much as I typically like the guy's art, and I think the art here is fine when it's standing alone, I don't think it's art that lends itself very well to, secondhand motion. John Romita Jr. has a tendency to draw faces in a very blocky or rectangular fashion. He has a tendency to draw body shapes that don't make a whole lot of sense if you actually think about what it would be like if that person had to move. And so when you see these bodies move, it just looks even more unnatural than your standard motion comic. And it's something that I never really could get over in the course of the show, is just how stilted and weird and bizarre everyone looked whenever they did anything.
Yeah. You know what it looks like sometimes? It looks like the blocky characters from like No Mercy on the N64.
Very much so. Or the blockheads from Gumby.
Yes. So yes, as you alluded to, Nick, as someone in my case that doesn't like John Romita Jr. art anyway, typically, he's just not my cup of tea. It was especially jarring to me because it's taking art that I already am not a fan of and kind of extrapolating that with really forced motion that doesn't fit the style at all. So that, I agree with you, Nick. That was an issue right out of the gate, and it hurts everything down to the fight scenes, but even more so the character moments. You don't get a strong sense of the emotions of these characters as they're talking because you can't really change their facial expressions much. So you have to go off the voice acting, which is a nice segue, because all of this that we've talked about with the animation could somewhat be offset if the voice acting was very convincing. Like if you have to really get across all the emotions through the acting in order to overcome the issues with the animation and the art style. And unfortunately, again, this is an area where Black Panther fails as a series. At least in the 2 episodes I watched, Nick. It's weird because I don't even want to criticize the guy that actually voices T'Challa, who is a really good actor named, I don't know how to pronounce it, Djimon Hounsou. He has been in things such as Gladiator. Famously, he was in Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio, which he won a supporting actor Academy Award for. And he's a very good, very established actor, but I don't get to encounter him much in those 2 episodes I watched. So I can't critique him too badly, but I can say he didn't really stand out. But the real problem comes from virtually everyone that is not a part of T'Challa's family. In other words, the people that come in and voice the other members of the royal family or the previous T'Challas do a good job. Carl Lumbly actually voices his uncle. We know him as Martian Manhunter from Justice League.
Yep.
Phil Lamar does Tashan's voice. You get various other established voice actors to do this stuff. The problem that you get sometimes when you're casting shows like this is you bring in Hollywood actors that have never done voice acting, and voice acting is a completely different ball of wax. A good example is for people, again, to draw it back to a wrestling comparison, when you're playing a WWE game and you get into a storyline mode and the voice acting is just god-awfully atrocious, or the commentary is even basically you're telling they used to tell Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, hey, just be Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler and read off the script, and they come off incredibly forced, and it leads to amazing parody songs such as Jim Ross's My Ass and My Ass Volume 2.
Indeed it does. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they have, a pretty awesome voice cast if you just look at the names on paper. I mean, you mentioned Jimon Hansu, Kerry Washington is in there, Alfre Woodard, who of course plays Mariah now on Netflix, on Marvel's Netflix show Luke Cage, Carl Lumbly, as you mentioned, Phil Lamar, Nolan North, very notably. If you're a fan of practically any video game made in the last 10 years, odds are Nolan North did a voice for it. Adrian Pasdar, who's currently on Supergirl playing Morgan Edge, does the voice of Captain America. So you've got just a variety of really talented voice actors who, I don't know if it's the material or the direction, but for the most part, turn in, I thought, really bad performances.
Horrible, yeah.
Jimon Hansu is fine enough as T'Challa, but I wouldn't even hump a whole lot of praise on the rest of the cast. Like you were saying that you would give the people in his immediate family a pass. I thought in some of the later episodes, Kerry Washington in particular took her African accent from believable to way over the top whenever she was supposed to be in any kind of distress, almost to the point of like parody. It was a rough listen for me at times, but it's just stunning to me that such a group of talented individuals would turn in such a lackluster performance.
Yeah, and I want to draw particular attention to the guy who is the main character in the first episode, who is Everett K. Ross, and he's voiced by a gentleman named David Bush, who does not have a Wikipedia entry, and based on his performance here, doesn't deserve one, because I've heard of going through the motions, because hell, I'm sure that you as well, Nick, but I do it at work all the time. But and on this show right here every week on Place to Be Nation. But while we may go through the motions, I don't know that I've ever displayed less emotion than this guy voicing Everett K. Ross. He was just terrible. Yeah, he sounded like you took a high school student and handed him a script and said, "Hey, read this script. You're Everett K. Ross." It's just brutal. It's so bad. It takes me completely out. First of all, he's reading the lines too fast. He doesn't give any of the lines time to breathe, and he's telling this historical story about Captain America of all people, who also is voiced very badly, and it falls way off the rails. It's saying something, Nick, and I'm honest about this. The most impressive voice actor in the first episode was Stan Lee as General Wallace.
That's General Cornrow Wallace?
I don't know. I don't know his first name, Nick.
That was a Chappelle Show reference. That
I know. I'm aware.
Okay.
I was just going to let you take it where you may.
Oh, what else is new?
But yeah, Stan Lee was great in his role as General Wallace, who is a clearly racist old man, and he gets kicked out of the council offices. But yeah, it's just the voice acting falls so short of what you're looking for here. Oh, and don't forget about Juggernaut, who for some reason goes back and forth between just a regular, what you would expect to be a Juggernaut voice, and a deep Southern accent.
Yes, it is. Redneck Juggernaut is never something I had considered until this existed, and now I can't stop thinking about it.
Give us a little taste of it, Nick.
Oh, I'm in no condition to do that. I'm coming down with a cold, but I will tell you that later on in the show, one of the subplots is that Claw is raising an army to invade Wakanda, and he's able to convince a lot of people to join up with him by having the Black Knight tell them that they're gonna invade Wakanda to bring Jesus to the savages, and Juggernaut utters the line something to the effect of, "That's right, we're gonna bring Jesus to the blacks," and it is It is atrocious, man. Atrocious.
Good Lord. Yes, we also encounter Backtrock, the leader,
Yes.
who is voiced by a French-British actor. So,
All right.
Jean-Benoit Blanc does his voice. But yes, so we've established the animation doesn't work. The voice acting, again, just is not satisfactory. It is not to the standards that should be broadcast on national television. When you compare it to other projects that were going on at the same time, that are still going on now, it's just not even in the ballpark. Because even if you take a look at what we consider to be shows that are bad or shows that aren't for us per se, Ultimate Spider-Man, Teen Titans Go, whatever, in general, the voice acting is tremendous in all these shows. And that is just not the case with this one.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I mean, and then when you pair that with the issues with the art / animation, as we discussed earlier, it really hinders the show. I mean, you're already digging yourself a massive hole, and so the only way to dig yourself out is to do so with a compelling story. And I am, as you might guess by the plot about taking Jesus into Wakanda, not the most compelling story in the world. As we mentioned earlier, subplots that seemingly go nowhere, just kind of dance in and out of the main thread without contributing anything to the overall plot development. And then, of course, the bizarre characterizations, whether it be Juggernaut or this hyper militaristic Catholic Black Knight or this Russian version of Radioactive Man. It's just weird choices for characters to populate this thing the whole way through. And it just kind of all is very formulaic. I mean, they raise an army, they invade Wakanda, the Black Panther steps up and beats them, and that's pretty much it. There's no real twist or anything along the way. It's very paint by the numbers, and when you combine a paint by the numbers plot with bad animation and bad voice acting, you've got a bad television show.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring a little bit of attention before we get completely off of the voice acting to the the introduction randomly out of nowhere at the end of the first episode of the Deathlock program, which we don't know is the Deathlock program at that time. It just looks like some random governmental experiment, because they introduce the concept of Deathlock on this show as these soldiers that have been killed and then brought back to life and then lobotomized. And after being lobotomized, they just shoot guns at walls constantly, and they laugh because the guy that we see at the end of the episode laughs, and it is the creepiest, least convincing laugh you'll ever hear. It sounds like you pulled the cord on the back of a doll from like the 90s and just let it go. It's horrible. It is the worst thing. Absolutely the worst thing. As bad as what I just did. Just a terrible, terrible thing, and one of the worst parts of the entire thing. The other thing, Nick, unless you wanted to comment on that particular scene.
Nope, I'm good.
The individual known as Ulysses Claw on this show comes off to me more like Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget.
Is it the mechanical hand that does all the different shapes that made you think of that?
Yes, it was. And his just general, like, boring, generic villain approach to things. Just not that Dr. Claw was boring. Dr. Claw wasn't boring, but you know what I'm saying.
No, just the entirety of the Inspector Gadget television show was boring.
Oh, get out of here.
I'm not going to get out of here. Inspector Gadget sucked.
Inspector Gadget did not suck.
Inspector Gadget sucked.
Was awesome. He had his Penny would help him and whatnot. It was good.
It wasn't.
What little kid didn't want to be a version of Penny or join Penny on her adventures with Inspector Gadget?
Me?
Well, you weren't any kind of kid then. You came later anyway. You came in that stupid Power Rangers generation that followed. Forget all that crap.
Give me the Power Rangers over Inspector Gadget any day.
Lord. I would rather take it looks like someone took a crap or a
dump in the printer.
Anyway, yeah, so the cast did not do a good job. The animation, the story, okay, yeah, you mentioned I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but the biggest issue is it just jumps around way too much. There's no central thread to latch onto because the first episode is literally a Washington briefing explaining the history of the Black Panther. And we have nothing to make us interested in what's going on right now in Wakanda because we don't know. We have no idea. We're getting this briefing about the history of the agency, and then we get this random aside about the super soldier program that we find out later is Deathlock. And then in the second episode, which is helpfully titled Black Panther, we actually meet T'Challa, but we don't really get a whole lot of him. We get him interacting with his sister a little bit, and we get Claw assembling his team of supervillains. Also, we get maybe the worst portrayal of the X-Men of all time, or at least on a short list. Holy Lord.
Now, what was so wrong with that, Greg?
Well, first of all, they're fighting Juggernaut. They get their asses kicked by Juggernaut, which that happens. They just let him walk away.
Well, he wasn't their problem anymore. He was going to Wakanda.
He just walks off with Claw, and the X-Men just give up. They're just like, well, we came, we saw, we got our asses kicked, and we're done. Let's pack it in and go catch a flick tonight.
Somebody else's problem.
Yeah, so the X-Men just pass it on to Wakanda, and that didn't sit well with me because that doesn't seem like any characterization, particularly of Cyclops, that I could imagine.
Voiced by Nolan North.
But who am I to say? Who am I to say what Cyclops would do or wouldn't do? But alls I know is in this case, Cyclops was wrong.
As he is in most cases.
Yes. Of course, also Wolverine would be wrong here. But the implication I got was that Wolverine was punched so hard by the Juggernaut that he was just on an infinite loop of flying through buildings.
That's the best.
Oh, and then Nightcrawler teleports in.
Also voiced by Nolan North.
Lets Juggernaut know that he's teleported in just so that Juggernaut can hit him with a back fist. About instantly. Which is kind of funny, I have to admit. But, again, just not really in keeping with the typical X-Men characterization. So didn't like that. Nick, take us through the journey of the rest of the show.
No, I'd really rather not. I kind of explained it already anyway. I mean, it's pretty much just like Claw assembles the team, Batroc, the Radioactive Man, who else am I missing? The Juggernaut, of course, and the Black Knight. And they, build up an army for the, ostensibly for the purposes of, bringing religion to the Wakandans, even though the real purpose is just so Claw can take over Wakanda. And so there's a big invasion. The Wakandan army successfully fights it off. The Black Panther defeats Ulysses Claw in combat. And in the midst of all this, the Juggernaut picks up a cow and throws it at a Wakandan fighter jet,
as you do,
which is without question the highlight of the entire series. Is the Juggernaut?
Now, see, that's almost enough to save it for me.
The Juggernaut taking a cow and shot putting it towards a fighter jet.
That's pretty good. We should probably explain that combat thing because again, we don't know much about Black Panther. I don't know if this is already canon or if this is a new thing or not, but in this show, it's established that in the history of Wakanda, the Black Panther is determined by trials by combat, and every year, people line up from the community to try to defeat the Black Panther and take the throne of being Black Panther. And it's implied by and they have sports announcers for it in Wakanda, and these sports announcers
doing ultra convincing African accents, by the way.
Yes, and they helpfully explain to the audience that there have only been a few upsets in recent years, which implies to me that there have been just a bunch of random dudes that have won the ability to become the Black Panther since T'Chaka died.
I agree. It's a very strange thing.
It's very strange. And so T'Challa wins this, of course, that we see in flashbacks. But probably the best and most effective part of this series, other than Juggernaut throwing cows, was the portrayal of the Royal Council in Wakanda. I actually really like that, how they have their meetings and go back and forth about different issues, and they take their stands. It reminded me a little bit of what we've seen in the Aquaman comics by Dan Abnett, Nick, where we have these strong opinions of these characters in the royal family, so to speak. And I liked how they built up the lifelong kind of jealousy that his sister feels towards him, because she feels like she should have been the one to fight that day and win the crown of Black Panther, and she's kind of got a little bit of jealousy in her, in addition to a little bit of I guess disdain from a few of the other people that wanted that crown over the years. And so I actually did like that element. I will point out that was one positive to this. I thought that was pretty well written and pretty well realized. Unfortunately, it's such a small, insignificant portion of this series that I can't really give it too much credit.
Yeah, I mean, there really isn't much. I mean, even the things that briefly, the moments, whether it's Juggernaut throwing the cow at the fighter jets or Juggernaut throwing the cow at the fighter jets, even when I enjoy things, there's not enough there to really make up for the rest of the show. I mean, guys, it's just bad.
That would have been a good pitch for a sequel series. Juggernaut batters up.
Yes.
And basically it's just the Juggernaut chunking farm animals at various superheroes and or military vehicles, and
or overall wearing characters from the Preacher universe.
Oh. It depends on if they have gills or not.
We've gone off the rails once more,
as we often do. But that being said, there's not a whole lot else to say about this. It's little short 20-minute episodes. You can find it if you really work hard online. If you just type into the Google machine, there are ways you can find it, and there are also DVDs apparently. Although I can't imagine. Well, no, I'm not going to finish that statement. But what I'm going to say is, if you would like to pay for this on DVD, more power to you. And
we personally would not, but that's just us.
Right. So basically what we're saying is, if you take our advice for anything, pass on this one for sure, at least in my book. There were a couple of really funny moments unintentionally, and there were a few good things here and there, I thought, but not worth the time investment at all. It's not good. It's especially, it's going to become even, for a while there were those that would defend this, I think, because we hadn't had anything like it, and now I think it's about to be deservedly wiped out because the movie is about to render this series obsolete, and I think that we're starting to get the Black Panther a little so much more attention that he'll never again have a show that is of this low quality.
Yeah,
Black Panther show, but it ain't going to be of this kind of this ilk.
In hindsight, now I wish we had just done an episode on the second Ultimate Avengers movie that introduced Black Panther instead of doing this.
which is more of just kind of like just kind of average, but certainly not offensively bad. I don't want to say offensively, but it's just, this was bad, folks.
Why are you couching, Greg? Say what you mean, damn it. Mean what you say.
This was not good. This was just not a good investment of time. It was certainly a curiosity, and honestly, Nick, I always enjoy these curiosity episodes, the ones like the Wonder Woman pilot from NBC.
Right.
If we ever find a way to do that JLA episode from the 90s.
Yes.
Those are the kind of the ones that appeal to me, because and occasionally, like with the Wonder Woman one, there were things in that we were like, hey, that wasn't so bad, and then there were things that were like, oh, not good at all. But this it was really hard to find redeeming qualities in outside of cow throwing.
I agree completely. Just not much here to redeem it, and here's hoping that, like you said, the movie will come along and kind of render this obsolete here in the next few weeks.
Yes, and for those that are interested, if anyone is, on January 18th, 2011, this series was released to Region 1 DVD by Shout Factory, and it has since been repackaged as one of the Marvel motion comics in the Marvel Knights animation line. So you can find it, but again, even if you're going to go the motion comic route, there are much better ones out there. And with that being said, let us know. Did you disagree? Do you love this show? Let us know how we were wrong. Have you seen it? What are your thoughts on it? Let us know through social media. I am on Twitter at gphillips8652. That's GPHILLIPS 8652. He is Nick Duke 87. You can also find us on Facebook at Place to Be Nation Comics. Just open up your Facebook browser, type in Place to Be Nation Comics, join the group. We'll let you in. We'll have great conversation and more. Great conversation and a lot of links. And also you can email us, Greg P at placetobenation.com, Nick D at placetobenation.com.
The internet's loneliest email addresses.
You're damn right. You know, I wanted to talk to you, Nick, about the genre of motion comics, but that's for another time. Let us know how we're doing, folks. In the meantime, we're going to take a break and let you listen to commercials for all the other great shows here at the Place to Be Nation family, including our buddies here at Place to Be Nation Pop, who I'll just send a quick shout-out to. We've got Sellers Points with Russell and Kelly. We've got Todd Weber's Conversation Comics with Todd Weber and Tim Capel. We've got, of course, Geek and Sassy with Geek and Sassy. We've got... That's Jennifer and Miranda, of course. We've got Easy Like David.
Yes! Yes! There we go. It's taken over. I am launching a one-man war on the term Sunday Groove. It's like the war on Christmas. That's what I'm doing. I'm launching a war to get this term
Are you going to release a bunch of like coffee mugs that have your terminology on them only?
Yes, and by a bunch of coffee mugs, I mean no coffee mugs.
Fair enough. And of course, that is the Sunday Groove, where you can listen to all of the music talk that you could fit in your ear holes. And we've got a couple other interesting things coming out in the near future. I don't want to blow the announcement here in case they don't want us to, but we got some other exciting podcasts dropping here in the near future at Place to Be Nation Pop. And with all that being said, we'll take a break. When we come back on the other side, we'll have reading, watching, and the rundown. Hard-Traveling Fanboys.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlayStation.com, and we offer those to you on 3 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the original Place to Be podcast, as well as Main Event, Lucha Afterground, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows, as well as the Our Vantage Point podcast and Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver quick-hit pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Psychology is Dead, Puro Potpourri, Stacy and Elliot's Bogus Journey, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Letters from Center Stage, Space City, and NWA Classics On Demand Adventure, Through the Years, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Kayfabe, and much more. And on our popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Rank and File, PTBN Dadcast, Go Home in a Box, NBA Team, and Lucha Undead, as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans with the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversation, Geek and Sassy, and Imaginary Stories podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to all of our feeds on iTunes, and while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlacementNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlacementNation.com/Amazon when shopping online, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Bonehead's Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, TheHistoryOfWrestling.com, and Scott Keats' blog of Doom. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlacementNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
I've always wanted to try that. This trip was worth it for that alone.
Great. One less black rhino in the world.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are back inside the L-shaped studio, climate-controlled L-shaped studio at that. Nick continues to forage on through his impending illness, but that notwithstanding, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to let anything impede us from getting to our ongoing segment. It's where we go into what we've been reading and watching during the week as it relates to comics. It's a segment we call Reading and Watching.
Reading and watching. What you been reading and watching? What have you been reading and watching? Tell us.
So, last week, of course, our CW shows are still going on in force.
Did we read anything this week? Either of us?
I didn't.
No, so let's just get that out of the way. On to watching.
Yes. Last week, of course, we started out with Supergirl on Monday night. And this was quite the interesting episode, because this episode involved your favorite character and ours, Morgan Edge. And particularly it involved yet another series of assassination attempts between Morgan Edge and Lena Luthor, and this one involves Lena's mom, and we get a little bit more character development for Lena as she starts to come to grips a little bit with some of her family's ruthlessness. And we get a lot of convenient wrapping up of ongoing subplots, and very little of the Rain story is seen here, which I thought was a little disappointing for me, given that I've actually been enjoying that. Particularly Samantha, and I think her name is Samantha, and her daughter Ruby are kind of almost invisible here. They are shown, there is a subplot, but nothing really gets advanced. And it's very much an episode that's carried by Lena, and which is fine. She does a good job, but just the problem of involving James Olsen and involving Guardian in a laughable scene, ripped right out of The Dark Knight, where he's dangling Morgan Edge over a bridge and doing like the worst Batman impression of all time. But at the end of the day, you can't take it seriously because he's freaking Jimmy Olsen. I'm sorry. No, I made a mistake. He's James Olsen. And that part was bad. I thought there was some very poor CGI in this episode, particularly a scene involving a drone that looked like it was out of Mutant X, if anyone remembers that old show. But the Lexo suit looked okay, I guess.
It was cool to finally see it on the show.
It was cool to see it, absolutely. No, it was great to see the Lexo suit pop up in execution, give or take, but not horrible, and cool to see that suit show up. Cool to see Mama Luther again, and that was good. But I think overall a pretty weak effort from Supergirl in this case.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, anytime Morgan Edge is a primary focus of an episode, I always kind of roll my eyes a little bit and get a little bored with it pretty quickly. And that was certainly the case here. Then you mix in a heavy dose of James Olsen, and this one is already kind of behind the 8 ball, at least in terms of my perception of it. But that being said, it did have some okay moments.
Mm-hmm.
It did have some decent Lena and Kara stuff, and getting to see the Lexo suit was cool, but still not one of the finer episodes this season. Probably near the bottom of the list for Supergirl season 3, honestly.
Agreed, and I also did not like the convenient finale, wrapping up both villains at the same time, and to me, it felt like a waste of oh gosh, what is the Mother Luther's name?
Lillian
Luther. Yeah, it felt to me like a little bit of a waste of Lillian Luther to me.
But it felt clear to me that she's going to be back. Like her dialogue with Lena towards the end certainly seemed to indicate, future appearances as opposed to some sort of resolution.
It did, but it also felt like her days as a serious threat villain may be over.
Well, that's good.
Like I can see her turning into a villain of the week to pop up occasionally, but it doesn't look like they're ever really going to wrap up the Cadmus arc. I hope I'm wrong on that, but maybe next season. But anyway, that one was kind of a not a bad episode, but just exceedingly uninteresting, I guess would be the way to put it. Now, Tuesday night brought us to The Flash, and that was an episode that was part of a 2-part arc involving a crossover with our world of pro wrestling and Bill Goldberg playing Big Sir. We talked about this last week, and
what was his comic book name again? Now I gotta know. It was funny. I can't remember what it was. Big Sir, DC Comics. As I type it into the Google machine,
he was known as
Doofus
P. Ratchet.
Doofus P. Ratchet. Yes, they totally should have gone with Doofus P. Ratchet.
Yes, I agree, but nevertheless...
and he still looks like a white mushmouth.
So this involves... Barry finds out that Big Sir was basically framed for this crime that he committed to end up in jail and has kind of given up hope of ever getting out. And Barry makes it his mission from inside through his friends, Ralph Dibny, Cisco, and the rest of the team, to clear Big Sir of his charge. And... that kind of takes over the episode to me, honestly. Like, there is a plot involving the guy that set him up, who happens to be the villain of the week, and I forget his name, actually.
As do I.
But he has the ability to miniaturize things, basically.
And bring them back to size.
Yes. So he... anyway, he's the villain of the week, and the team... led by Ralph, has to figure out a way to stop this guy, basically. And they do, but things don't turn out the way that they necessarily intended. But to me, I thought this was a great episode of The Flash. I loved it. I keep saying basically, but what I mean is that this show encapsulated everything I love about The Flash. It gave us humor. It gave us heart. It gave us good action. But in particular, Barry was front and center here alongside a surprisingly great performance by Goldberg. Not to blow smoke, but I was surprised at how good he did here, because I bought everything he said in this episode. He had a couple of really standout scenes with Barry that are some of the best scenes that Barry's had with anyone this season outside of the core team. Really strong stuff here. It made me care about his backstory. It made me, I felt a feeling of relief at the end of the episode when Barry has this amazing heroic moment to give Big Sir kind of his happy ending moment. So I was kind of blown away by this one, Nick. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird when you think about it. When you hear that Goldberg's coming in to do a 2-episode arc, you imagine that he's going to do something with some action to it. And really, they kind of give him a dramatic story arc. And for the most part, Bill Goldberg somehow learned how to pull off some relatively emotionally affecting scenes. It's really remarkable when you think about it. But yeah, like you, I enjoyed this one as well. I actually thought a lot of the stuff with Minnie Cisco and Minnie Ralph was really funny.
Oh, yep.
Especially their interactions with Harry and Caitlin. So yeah, I thought this was one of the stronger episodes of The Flash in recent weeks. And, you know, one thing it had going for it was no appearance of new shitty DeVoe. It was new shitty DeVoe free.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I didn't want to shortchange Ramon and Ralph, but they were great when they were miniaturized, and their interactions with Harry Wells, who is a national treasure at this point, and by that I mean he's a Nicolas Cage movie from 2005 ish that deserves his spot on the show, and they need to keep him around. So very, very strong episode from The Flash, and again showed Barry Allen's heart, which is at the center of this show and makes it tick each and every week. That brings us to Black Lightning, the continuing adventures of Jefferson Pierce as he gets back into his Black Lightning role. This was episode 3, I believe. Nick, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in this one, it involves an organizing of a march to protest what's been going on with the 100, the gang in the city. In the previous episode, of course, one of Jefferson's childhood friends was murdered. Or actually, yeah, one of his childhood friends or one of his former students. I can't remember. I think it was a childhood friend. She gets murdered, and that sets off this massive protest in the city to try to stop what's going on, this violence. And the biggest surprise to me, Nick, in this episode was that the best scenes to me, or the best scene in the episode, didn't involve the usual suspects. It didn't involve Black Lightning and a crook, or it didn't involve him and his wife. It involved Jefferson kind of almost being an ancillary player in a confrontation between the police chief and the Reverend in the beginning. I thought this was an incredible scene because it was handled, and this is to this show's credit, what it does better than any of the other shows, what it does better than any comic book show I've seen, is tackling complex issues in a balanced manner.
Right.
Because I was watching that scene, and I thought, I thought it was setting up to present the police chief guy in a bad light, as kind of all of the prior episodes have. Kind of shedding doubt on whether he's being upfront or not. But in this one, it felt like he had a lot of damn good points. And when he bowed up to the preacher, I was like, hey, he's got some points. Of course, the preacher had points too. But I thought it did a good job of balancing.
But did he have points all his own, sitting way up high?
Sitting way up high? Yes, and in fact, they were sitting way up
firm and high. Ah, that's the key.
So I thought both.
And strangely enough, the march they went on in this episode did take place at night. They were moving at night. You could very well say they were, going through some night moves.
You could say that. You shouldn't, but you could. But I thought both characters had great points. It was a phenomenal scene. We also got another tragedy at the end of this episode as a character that I was growing attached to because of his relationship with Black Lightning's daughter, youngest daughter. He gets caught in the crossfire, basically, of Black Lightning's war with the 100, and particularly with a fellow by the name of Tobias Hoyle. Another strong entry in this show.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was a little worried, honestly, when they killed off a certain character back in episode 2, because I thought that the role of secondary villain was going to be very difficult to fill. But based on just the very limited appearance we get here from the character called Lady Eve, I'm very intrigued by her and what her deal is. She's got some delightfully evil motivations, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those are played off of in future episodes. So,
what's the deal with Lady Eve?
So I thought, once again, an outstanding effort from Black Lightning in my book.
Yeah, it just continues to impress. And finally, we wrap up the week of shows with Thursday Night and Arrow on the CW. And this was an episode that continues the subplot we've seen throughout the season of Vigilante and the Black Canary and their interaction with one another. And this kind of takes that whole subplot full circle as we get through flashbacks, a little bit of fleshing out of what their relationship was like prior to the accident, that the night of the particle accelerator explosion in Central City, while simultaneously Oliver's team and the quote-unquote new team led by Curtis are kind of agreeing to work together to try and take down this outfit led by Caden James from the inside. And of course, as things typically go for Team Arrow, things don't exactly go according to plan. We also get a subplot, and a pretty touching subplot, I thought, of Captain Lance having to sort of, by the end of the episode, seemingly coming to terms with the fact that his daughter seems like she's not coming back. Particularly, and at this point, after her actions in this episode, I don't really see any way of walking that back. Pretty brutal way to go about things. But I have to say, Nick, I just watched this one before we went to air. I loved it. I thought it was great. I mentioned this to Russell that this episode did more to make me care about Vigilante than any of his prior appearances did. I thought it was really good. I thought his interaction with Ollie was really good. I think it pretty much everything in this episode worked for me.
Yeah, I agree. I like the episode as well. The issue for me, though, is you can't wait until the character's, spoiler, final appearance on screen to give us a reason to care about him. Because honestly, up until this point, they haven't given us a reason to care about Vigilante or to buy into he and Black Canary's romance. We get some expository dialogue from Black Canary about how they had a past connection and everything, but we haven't been given a reason to really buy into him. So while I appreciated the effort here, to me it felt like too little too late in terms of making him a loss that we were going to feel as viewers. So I agree with you, though, that I like the rest of the episode. I'm still not crazy about the attitude that the new team has every time they interact with old Team Arrow, about how they think they're equals, even though they clearly are not.
In this case, Renee takes the cake for his stupid, I'm starting to get PSD. As soon as we're done, we're out of here, Hoss.
I am so tired of Hoss. Stop trying to make Hoss a thing. It's not going to be a thing.
I wanted Diggle to walk over and just slap him in the face and dare him to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, really. I want to see original Team Arrow just beat the ever-living piss out of these guys at this point. But
wouldn't that be a great end to the season if at the end of it they each pull a Seth Rollins and grab a chair and hit the other guys in the back with a chair, just beat them into oblivion?
It would be great, especially seeing Felicity beat whoever she's going to beat. That would be
awesome. Pretty funny. But no,
now I'm worried that they're setting up for because we saw the return of what's her name? Alana, I think is her name, who plays the old Helix chick. I'm worried they're going to give the new team their own Felicity and have her go over there at some point. I don't care. I just don't care. How about just spin them off into their own show that no one will watch and it can get canceled? How about that? Let's do that.
Right.
Because I'm tired of these guys at this point.
I'm fine with that. But that being said, I thought it was a great episode. And where I differ from you is I did feel the death of Vigilante. Because I thought the performance from both him and from Dinah was very strong there. And so it actually did make me feel that death in a way that I wasn't expecting. And one of the main reasons I ended up loving the episode. I also loved Dinah's conversation with Ollie at the end. And how Ollie shows up kind of coldly to try to get her to think about things logically, and she's clearly has no interest in doing that, and frankly appears to be ready to take actions that should have been taken a long time ago. So I'm down with that. Also, readily apparent now, I think they're pretty well spelling it out that Richard Dragon's going to be the big bad ultimately, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be somebody else. I just don't know that it's necessarily Richard.
Because they said it's somebody close to Caden James.
That's a good point.
That is doing all this. So that's what makes me think that Richard Dragon is a lot more than they've let on to this point. Which hopefully he is, because he's a great character in the comics. So anyway, time to rank them, and this is going to be a tough one for me, Nick, because I really, really, really liked 3 of the 4 this week.
Yes.
You want to go first?
Sure. I'll go Black Lightning at number 1, The Flash at number 2, Arrow at number 3, and Supergirl at number 4.
I am going to go... Damn, this is hard. I'll go Black Lightning 1, Arrow 2, Flash 3, and Supergirl 4.
Mm-hmm.
But very, very close margin on all of them, honestly. The top 3, anyway. Supergirl was well behind this week.
And what's crazy is, I think we would both agree that to this point, the weakest episode of Black Lightning yet of the 3, and still the number 1 episode of the week. Just shows you how on fire that show is right now.
And I think that the momentum is trending, for me anyway, the momentum right now is trending up for Arrow. It's kind of staying stationary for Flash. It's staying stationary for Black Lightning. And unfortunately, it's starting to dip down a little bit for Supergirl. And I'm hoping that they can rebound here in these next few weeks.
We shall see.
So, with that being said, that wraps up watching. Let's get to our weekly look at the news and notes of the comic book world. It's part of the longest-running weekly episodic comic book podcast in all places to be nation. See, I have to keep you on your toes, Nick. I can't just make it easy for you.
Oh, for God's sake.
Well, this is a little segment we like to call the Rundown.
Welcome to the Rundown, where we talk some comic news. Welcome to the Rundown, where we talk about movies too.
And Nick, we're going to start off on the printed page. What butters our bacon? Printed comics. And in this case, it's a story about ya boy, Brian Michael Bendis.
And ya boy, Superman.
That's right. Because news came out this week that after Action Comics number 1000, Brian Michael Bendis is going to be pulling a John Byrne and taking over both Action Comics and Superman in July. This according to an interview with Forbes. And appropriately enough, speaking of John Byrne, it's going to all start with a 6-issue weekly series titled Man of Steel, leading the way. Of course, longtime comic book fans may remember that Man of Steel was the name of the landmark miniseries that John Byrne did in the mid-'80s that redefined Superman after the Crisis on Infinite Earths and pretty much defined him for the modern era. So Bendis, who comes to DC after 17 years at Marvel, is going to have a short story inside Action Comics number 1000. Then Superman, the title, is eventually going to renumber at number 1. Let's sigh. But and Action Comics is going to move on to number 1001, which is awesome. And in between, we're going to get this 6-issue weekly miniseries that is apparently intentionally evoking the John Byrne miniseries of the past. So Bendis is going to do this. He says it's going to include. He says that it's going to include the biggest status quo shakeup for Superman since Crisis on Infinite Earths. So that's been 30 years. Oh God, no, 30 years, 30 plus years since then, and he does say that he's going to follow up on what Dan Jurgens has done in Action Comics and what Peter Tomasi and Patrick Gleason have done over on Superman. But there's a lot to digest here, Nick. Bendis is a huge get for DC. It's gotten a lot of mainstream attention. What he's planning on doing with this title, it certainly looks like we're going to get a big push for the Man of Steel. But I got to be honest with you, Nick. There are certain things in here that worry me just a little bit in terms of when you talk about status quo shakeups and catastrophic, or not catastrophic, but of earth-shaking changes to the character and his status quo. It gets me a little concerned because I think Superman's in the best place that he's been as a character probably in 20 years right now. So, or certainly in a decade or more. So, yeah, Nick, I want to get your thoughts. You're a huge Bendis fan. You're not the biggest Superman fan, but you have been reading, especially Action Comics here in Rebirth. So I want to get your thoughts on what all this means, what it means going forward.
Well, as I've said, I do have some concerns about Bendis taking over Superman, mainly because I don't feel like it's the best pairing of creator with character. I think Bendis really excels when he's able to do one of two things, either comedic quippy dialogue or darker, more street-level storytelling. He's very good at both of those, and I don't necessarily know that either of those things is going to fit into a Superman title. Now, he's all of course done things that other people like that aren't for me. I know you're not a big fan, but his all-new X-Men run is generally well-regarded, even though it's not my favorite of his work. So there's a possibility this could work out. My larger concern in terms of DC fans becomes, right now, let's say, for example, you think that Tom King is not doing a very good job on Batman. There may be people out there who think that, not that I'm aware of any such people. But you have, a counterpoint in James Tynion IV, his run on Detective Comics. So you have two fairly distinct visions for the character, two fairly different takes on the character running concurrently.
And what Scott Snyder is doing on Metal.
Of course. So you've got, all these different versions out there floating, and you can kind of pick your flavor of Batman, if you're a big Batman fan and you don't like what's going on in one particular title. My concern with giving Bendis basically the entire Superman line is, for those fans who inevitably, there will be some who aren't a fan of his take on the character, they have nowhere to turn. And I think that's a little unfortunate. When you're going to run multiple titles, I don't necessarily agree with the idea of giving them all to one guy. I think there's room for different artistic interpretations, and I don't know that that's going to be lent to here. Now, all that being said, I think there are a lot of positive things here too. I think I am looking more into his comments about how he wants to build off of what Dan Jurgens and Peter Tomasi have done more than I am his comments about the status quo shakeup. I think it's clear that John Kent has been a massive success for DC as a character this far, and I don't see him going anywhere anytime soon. Same for the Marriage, obviously. I think he'll find other ways to shake up the status quo without attacking those things that you're concerned about. But ultimately, it's Brian Michael Bendis doing some DC work for the first time in a long, long time, and the first time since he became a real notable comics creator. So I'll be there to check it out. Hopefully, it will be something I'll enjoy. I do like the idea of giving the Superman titles different feels. He talks about, and I don't think it's mentioned in the Newsarama article that we used to talk about this, but in a separate interview, I believe he mentioned that Superman was going to be the big adventure-driven book, and that Action Comics, despite the name, was going to be more focused on Superman's interpersonal relationships and how he relates to the rest of the DC universe. And I think that's really cool about having, kind of a big epic scope book and kind of a smaller, more focused book simultaneously. I mean, if you're going to have concurrent books featuring the same character, no reason not to take that approach and give them distinct feels. So that's one aspect I am excited about, even though I wish those were swapped and Action was the actual, Action comic. But that's picking nits.
Yeah, and I think that it's evoking to me the best era of Superman books, which is that late 80s, early 90s era, and part of that was exploring Superman's supporting cast, and it sounds like he's really going to use Action Comics to delve into the people like Perry White, like Lex, like I would be shocked if we don't see the return of characters like Guardian and Gangbuster and some of the more street level Metropolis heroes, turning Metropolis more into a character. And most excitingly, I got to be honest, Nick, I'd be nuts to not be excited to see Brian Michael Bendis writing Lois Lane. You're talking about a guy who was a newspaper reporter in the past, a guy who writes very strong. I know some would disagree with this, but I would argue writes very strong women in his comics. And to me, Lois is the strongest woman at DC,
and who has already written
in
my viewpoint anyway, a very good newspaper set comic book in the Pulse over at Marvel, which I think we need to hop on a long book of at some point. But So all those things coming together, yes, that's exciting, but it almost makes me wish he was doing just a Lois Lane book or a Daily Planet book and not doing, 2 different Superman books. But beggars can't be choosers. I'm still excited for it and still looking forward to see what the future holds.
And moving on to another DC property, this is actually a video game, and we are moving on to a game that we haven't talked about a lot, which is Injustice 2. It's been out for about a year now, I guess, right, Nick?
Yeah,
and,
something like that.
And finally, we are getting another, what I believe is the last bit of DLC for it, and it's one that I admittedly wasn't excited about because of my ongoing issues with their approach to DLC on these games. But in this case, having watched the trailer, it looks like they really took a lot of time and effort into making this work. And that is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are going to be downloadable on Injustice 2 here, if not now, then very, very soon. The trailer has been released for their gameplay footage. And I gotta be honest, I wasn't happy about this, Nick, until I watched this trailer, because I've not been happy about how Warner Brothers has handled WB Games has handled the DLC on the DC games. I think that they haven't taken advantage of some of the great DC characters in favor of stuff like Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees or whatever they've thrown in. Sub-Zero certainly. But in this case, the Ninja Turtles look totally different new and fresh and different than any characters that have come before, in that when you watch this trailer, you're tagging off between the turtles and using tandem attacks, using all of the turtles to interact with one another. And the way that they got just some of the flourishes of these characters, how each character's weapon works differently, and even the winning animation at the end with the pizza, it's just really cool. And I got to be honest, I'm if I were someone that had a PlayStation 4, I would be pretty excited about downloading these guys and playing them in the game.
Yeah, it looks really cool. We saw, like you mentioned, some of the tandem moves, the tagging in and out system. It looks like something different. So when you pair that, this is being released as part of a DLC pack alongside the Atom and the Enchantress. Not really familiar with what the Enchantress is going to play like, but especially that Atom trailer that was released, it looks really different from a lot of the other characters in the game. So variety is good in fighting games. So I'm really excited about this latest DLC pack.
As am I. And speaking of exciting, another thing dropped this week, which is the trailer for the upcoming Wolverine The Long Night podcast.
Yes.
This is Marvel's first foray into the podcast business as far as telling a scripted story, a scripted podcast. And I have to be honest, Nick, I didn't actually get to listen to this entire trailer yet. I only listened to the very first maybe 15 seconds of it. But what were your impressions of this one?
Yeah, I really liked it. It seems to me, if you're basing it off the trailer, you know how sometimes we talk about stories where we like the approach where almost the lead superheroic character is a background character, if that makes any sense? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what it seems to be with this, where it feels like there's this small town murder mystery and Logan is there, but you hear a lot more from the other characters than you do Logan himself. And it's kind of building up the intrigue of how Logan ties into all this. And it's very clearly a Logan that is very early on in his, not yet an X-Man, kind of still off on his, by himself. And it seems like they're taking something of a horror approach with it as well, because there's this one woman who's in hysterics, screaming about how she saw a man with claws and he was covered in gore and blood and stuff. And it's a really interesting take. And it's, I've always been a fan of this kind of concept. There's a company called Graphic Audio that does a lot of these for both Marvel and DC that are longer form audio presentations, typically 6 hours or even longer in some cases. So I'm a big fan of the general concept, and I'm excited that Marvel is putting, at least some of its eggs in this basket. Unfortunately, for those who aren't aware, it will be on Stitcher Premium at first, which means you'll have to pay for the episodes if you want them on first release. But I believe there's a 3-month and possibly a 6-month delay, and at that time, it's going to be opened up to everybody for free. So I will be waiting on the free version, but this is one I am eagerly anticipating. and will support, even if it isn't that great, just because I'm hoping it will encourage Marvel and DC to do more things like this.
Yeah, I'm excited for it too. Obviously, my favorite Marvel character. I like the format. I used to listen to the audio books when I was a kid of things like Batman Nightfall and I believe The Death of Superman as well. So, you know, I'm interested in seeing what they do with this. So, and hey, might be a good chance for an off the page at some point in the distant future.
Yeah, we need to get into one of those graphic audios at some point too, but they're
just so long.
They are so long. We could always just do them down the road. You know, like say we're going to do one in 3 months and work through it, but that's neither here nor there at the moment.
Absolutely. But what is here is a report that,
or more accurately, there.
Yes, a report that occasionally we get stories on this, and it always bums me out. But 10 years after his death, there's a new documentary out about Heath Ledger, the actor who portrayed the Joker in 2008's The Dark Knight. And it includes a quote from his sister Kate that's not really a shock to people that have followed, this movie and that franchise, but was just kind of confirmation of what we've all known. And basically she reveals that he was so proud of what he had done in The Dark Knight, and she talked to him the night before he died, and he was already talking about his plans for another Batman movie, that he loved working with Chris Nolan and Christian Bale and Gary Oldman and had the best time of his life making that movie. So it pretty much confirms that he was going to come back for their Dark Knight Rises, which doesn't surprise, I don't think, anybody really. But just another bummer about that whole aspect is he was doing the best work of his career, and it was just cut short so quickly.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. Like you said, this is something that we kind of assumed for years, but this is as close to like confirmation from the horse's mouth as you can possibly get, considering Chris Nolan is notoriously tight-lipped about story development for his films and ideas that weren't used and stuff. So he's never really talked about even the potential of Heath Ledger appearing in another one. So while it was something we all assumed, it was still kind of cool to hear confirmation of that, and just bum you out and even more that we never got to see that one last Joker turn on the big screen.
Yep, totally agreed. So let's pick the spirits up a little bit with the official synopsis of New Line Cinema's Shazam movie that is coming out in the near future. It is being worked on now. This is the first time we've had the official synopsis, and here it is. I'm just going to read it. We all have a superhero inside us. It just takes a bit of magic to bring it out. In Billy Batson's case, by shouting out one word, Shazam! This streetwise 14-year-old foster kid can turn into the adult superhero Shazam, courtesy of an ancient wizard. Still a kid at heart, inside a ripped, godlike body, Shazam revels in this adult version of himself by doing what any teen would do with superpowers. Have fun with them. Can he fly? Does he have X-ray vision? Can he shoot lightning out of his hands? Can he skip his social studies test? Shazam sets out to test the limits of his abilities with the joyful recklessness of a child, but he'll need to master those powers quickly in order to fight the deadly forces of evil controlled by Dr. Thaddeus Savannah. That's perfect. Honestly, that's exactly what I was looking for out of a Captain Marvel Shazam movie, and it sounds a lot like some of the pitches we've made in our fantasy projects over the years, Nick. The way it was written, so perhaps we're on the right track there as well.
Perhaps we are, and once again, it's not for us to say, but perhaps that concept will be making a return later this year. But yeah, like you said, this sounds great. I think also it mentions kind of a rundown of characters. I read that somewhere, possibly in the full press release itself. But it seems like, based on the inclusion of Billy's friends prominently in the press release, it seems like it's going to take a lot of cues from the Jeff Johns, Gary Frank backups that ran in Justice League there for a long time during the New 52 era, which I think is a great approach. I'm obviously not the world's most well-read person when it comes to Captain Marvel / Shazam, so to me, anytime you start with something Jeff Johns wrote, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I actually never read those backups, so it's going to be new to me unless I read it before then. But
They eventually
I think that's a
collected them
great-
all as a standalone trade, so you can find that if you want to.
Indeed. And I may track that down in the near future, but nevertheless, very much looking forward to that. Sounds like it's capturing the spirit of the character, and I think this movie needs to be different than the rest of the DC movies have been.
Has to be. I mean, just for the character. I mean, based on the character himself, like it can't be made in the same tone as a lot of these DC movies. It's got to be, at its core, a family-friendly film, and whatever that means to you, obviously different people have different takes on what that means, but it's got to be something that kids can go and see and be entertained and thrilled by, as opposed to something like, even though I enjoy it for the most part, as opposed to something like BVS, which is kind of a tough sit for the younger audience.
Yeah, it's morose and it's kind of contemplative and sad at times. So yeah, that doesn't need to be Shazam. Shazam needs to be full of action, adventure, and joy the whole time, in a way that some other superhero movies don't have to be. This one kind of has to be that. And hopefully it will be. The other thing is, hopefully it doesn't make the mistakes of other DC movies, such as digitally removing a mustache in post-production, which is something that's referenced in a trailer that dropped this week. The new trailer for Deadpool 2, as our good friend Jim Ross would say. And no shock here, this was awesome. I watched the unrated version. I don't even know if there's been a rated version released or whatever, but I loved this unrated red band trailer that was released for Deadpool 2.
Did you think at all, like I did, that the Toy Story bit, the Reach for the Sky bit, was a nod to the pending Disney acquisition?
I didn't even think about that. It didn't even cross my mind. But it probably is. Yeah.
The Deadpool action figure dressed up like Woody from Toy Story.
Yeah.
Doing the Reach for the Sky line. I enjoyed that.
Yep. It was I'm not as versed in Toy Story as most because I've only seen the first one, but that makes sense. That makes perfect sense actually. But no, it was great. It was awesome. I don't really know what else to say. It was hilarious. The visual effects look like they're going to be really good. Cable looks like he's going to be really good, as played by Josh Brolin.
And it looks like they're leaning more into the fourth wall breaking, which was, don't get me wrong, they had it in the first one, and it was funny, but it wasn't as relied on as heavily as it is in a lot of the Deadpool comics that I've thumbed through. And this one looks like it is. Deadpool is going to be talking directly to us a lot of the time.
And referring to the production of the movie, which is great.
The CGI arm bit was just fantastic.
Would you be shocked at all if there would be any reference to Tim Miller, the director that left?
I wouldn't be shocked because they certainly haven't shown an unwillingness to take on any topic, whether it be Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine or the Green Lantern film or any other various comic book controversies that Ryan Reynolds has been involved in. But from all indications, the split there was actually, as opposed to most splits, which are all called amicable, I believe this one actually was amicable, and I don't think they want to rub any salt in the wound, so to speak. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. I wouldn't bet on it, but it wouldn't shock me at the same time.
Yeah, I could see it happening because I think he's got a good sense of humor, but I think that they poke fun at themselves enough to do it. But it's a great trailer, folks. If you haven't seen it, pull it up on YouTube and check it out.
The most difficult thing is trying to decide if you like that better or the Bob Ross trailer better.
Oh God, amazing, amazing!
And I still think I like the Bob Ross one better. The Bob Ross one is just like it's one
both
of
are amazing, but the Bob Ross one's one of the greatest marketing ploys for a movie that I've seen in some time.
Now, what you don't want to do is eat these paints.
You just whack it on there. Now we also, to wrap things up on the rundown, we got one more item for you.
Indeed.
And that is the release of the trailer of season 2 of Jessica Jones.
Yes.
Which essentially promises to reveal the origin of Jessica Jones and how she received her powers, mainly about her quest to uncover how she received her powers. And this has all of the Jessica Jones wit and sassiness, if you will, that we've all come to expect from Jessica.
I was going to say charm. I know a lot of people might disagree just because of how prickly she is by nature, but I find her rather charming as I did in this trailer as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's got she's rough around the edges and entertaining and all of that. She's great. It looks very, very compelling. The visuals, the new characters in there. I love the fact that we're apparently going to get more of Patsy here.
Yes,
seemingly as a sidekick to Jessica, which I think is going to be great.
Building to the Hellcat character from the comics.
Pretty much everything about this trailer excited me except the plot.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm not exactly thrilled about the plot myself either. My hope is that there are bits in the trailer that make it seem like she's going to start off on a path to discover more about her origin, and along the way going to encounter this figure who went through some of the same experiences, but is using their powers to hurt people and kill people, and it could possibly develop into more of a
figure.
A big figure. Could possibly develop into more of a personal vendetta than just an extended play at exploring her origin, because I think we kind of saw that on Luke Cage with some of those flashback episodes, and they wound up not really being that interesting. So I will agree with that the plot doesn't excite me, but I think the characters are compelling enough to make up for that, and hopefully they'll find a way to put an intriguing spin on it. And the closing shot of the trailer I thought was brilliantly done, where they did not want to give away too much about the return of the Purple Man, but clearly teasing his very ominous presence.
Yes. And I, for one, am very interested in seeing how a Prince hologram plays into Jessica Jones Season 2.
As long as it's Dave Chappelle Prince, I think we'll be okay.
Game blouses. With that being said, that brings us to an end of the rundown, and indeed the show. Now, Nick, what do we have coming these fine people's way? We've already told them that. And man, y'all are fine. I want you all to know. Every listener out there, if you're listening to this, including you, Greg Phillips, who's listening to this perhaps one day in your car, you're fine.
Agree to disagree. But what we have coming up is, as you mentioned earlier in the show, next week we've got another long book hunt, as we'll be looking at Ta-Nehisi Coates' first volume of his recent Black Panther run. And then we wrap up Black Panther Month with, of course, our feature-length review of the Black Panther theatrical film. So 2 more weeks of Black Panther Month, and looking forward to bringing you some mediocre quality shows over the next 2 weeks.
Certainly so. And then when we get into March, we'll be bringing back the Hard Travelers for Hire.
We will.
And we'll be joined by Jennifer Smith of Geek and Sassy to talk about Ant-Man.
Ant-Man, yes. Paul Ant-Man.
Paul Ant-Man.
Or Scott Ant-Man in this case.
Whatever. All we know is that his name's Ant-Man, and he'll be talked about by some. But all that being said, we're glad that you joined us this week. We hope you enjoyed your stay. And we also would love to get your thoughts on some of the great foods that you're enjoying right now. Foods that are deep fried, foods that are loaded with sugar and carbs, things that Nick and I are trying to avoid right now. Because you see, we suffer from that problem that so many do, which is that we're fat!
Yes! I was hoping that's where you were going, and that was, so that's good.
And if you have any great recipes for cauliflower, please let us know. Let us know about your cauliflower.
Oh, God.
We'll see you next week, folks.
Hard-Traveling Fanboys! 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 Hard-Traveling Fanboys!
Sorry I had a fight in the middle of your Black Panther party.